But I just want all the students to know that it's going to be the speakers that are speaking. Well, their images will be on screen. If you unmute and speak and ask a question, you will also be on screen for the live stream to Twitch and YouTube. So just know that ahead of time. And let's go. It's 2:03. So let's officially do it. So welcome everyone, as I said, to our first of several XR interviews that I'm doing on behalf of this class today. I am thrilled to have Tawny Schlieski and Nathan Bowser here to chat with us about XR. And just so you two know, it is virtual, immersive virtual event week. That's the topic of the week. However, the entire class is really focused on communications and XR. So we can talk about any and all that fall under that XR umbrella today. And I'm going to start off kicking out some starter questions, everyone. And then we will open it up to your questions. So I hope that today, I think we have about an hour. So I'm going to try to keep it to a tight hour the best I can. So let's get started. And I think the first question, I would love for you both to briefly introduce yourselves to my students and let them know kind of how you got started with XR and what you've been doing over the last little bit. And Tawny, I'll let you go first. Yeah.
Okay. So I started with XR at Intel. I was working in their labs, and so we did a lot of experimentation, sort of like tech-based experimentation, which basically means that we would build machines that could do more than most of what commercially available machines could do, and give them to creatives and see what kind of things they would be starting to build with those things. I work primarily, I describe my role, I kind of land as like a XR designer, but really what my job is to collaborate with artists and to sort of provide the technology and the bridge between the art and the technology. I did that for, like I said, Intel was a great starting place for a wide variety of reasons, mostly of which you get a really steady salary and spend a lot of their money to experiment. Which is a very handy thing to do and hard to do in a small company. And then I left Intel about 5 years ago, really to focus more on educational and training aspects of augmented and virtual reality. Intel was primarily interested at that time, mostly in the gaming, which is interesting and good market, certainly. But I was sort of interested in how we think about these new digital technologies and how they change how we think. So that was me.
I mean, love it, Tawny. Thank you so much. That was perfect. And Nathan, you're up.
Just that. That's amazing. So hi, I'm Nathan. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a customer first marketer who is the senior brand manager for an AR tool that's called Stream. So in my day-to-day, I get to do really awesome things like interview the technologists and the people building, the UX designers, the technologists, the strategists who build these kind of tools, and help brands and businesses understand where the value of AR and VR is, how they can act on it in practical ways today, and also how to think about it. For me, I really think this is really just a next step in XR is the next step in how we'll communicate with each other. And so I do a lot of trying to make it seem simple and approachable in those terms. And I got started doing this stuff because of people like Tawny. So this is an exciting time for me. I'm always excited to learn from these smarties.
Awesome, Nathan. And tell me a little bit more about Stream. I'm new to that, and I think my students are too. So what does Stream do exactly?
Oh gosh, on the spot, as the lead marketer there, I should be able to do this.
The elevator pitch, right?
So Stream is an AR video platform that brands use to connect with customers and companies use to connect with their workforce using AR-powered video in real time. Often you'll experience Stream maybe in a customer support kind of situation. Like, hey, I'm trying to install this new Ring doorbell on the front of my house, and I just can't figure out this one step. It'd be really easy if I could show it to somebody, but that when is somebody going to be able to show up here? Stream solves this really easily, right? Where an expert on their computer, just in a web browser, can send a WebXR link to a customer on their mobile phone. You open it up and you have a shared camera view, AR-powered camera view of the world that the customer sees. And so and then I have tools like AR pixels and drawing tools and camera vision that's kind of working in the background that help me see exactly what my customer is dealing with and solve their problem or help get them to the next step right away on the first call. And often what happens is for like service visits, you can reduce a house visit or a home visit to your house on up to 70% of calls. And it's actually a pretty cool technology. The customer doesn't experience a ton of AR, but we can actually read AR data and remote spatial data during the call that helps us serve them better later on. So it's a very lightweight experience for the customer, but uses AR tools to collect a lot of data and make informed choices remotely.
All right, Nathan, that was awesome.
That,
I'm going to ask you, maybe after this, you could share, I'm sure you have some sort of demo video that might make it a little easier for the students to understand what you're talking about. Because many of my students, are kind of just, this is their first foray into XR. And so want to be really mindful that what you said is a little complicated, I think, if you're just getting started. So I would love to have something visual for them. But let's talk about, first of all, let's kind of step back and just talk to me a little bit about how brands, when we think about brand communication, how are they currently today using immersive effectively, would you say, to reach their audiences? And either of you can maybe kick off with that question.
Nathan, I feel like it's more your it's over
sure. I'll jump in. In terms of, I think this week's conversation is really apt, right? In my sort of notes ahead of time, entertainment and events I work from home teaching the world's leading brands XR strategy, and I work from my kitchen table with 2 angry dogs. So apologies. So entertainment and events is amazing. Everything from, dragons that might fly around a baseball stadium during a break period to like interactive AR walls where you can take pictures, with your favorite sports players are really awesome. Tawny's done amazing things activating like XR theater and experiential events. Gaming is also huge. We've probably like a lot of even like Universal Studios, a lot of the rides are moving toward kind of immersive, almost like VR on screen kind of events rather than sending you around a roller coaster track. So that's a big one for sure.
And actually that brings up a really good question, because as I had the students bringing in some of their own, talk about their own experience, that idea of immersive rides came up and they're like, is that VR? Is it not VR? What do you call that? And I'm like, I don't know. So what do you call, like, so when you think about you're in a place, my take was like, okay, it's not VR if you're in an actual place, not in a headset. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But my understanding of these spaces is that you're in a place, but instead of having it be like, remember the old Pirates of the Caribbean where you'd go and there was like a real river and a real pirate, like apparently now it's all not real. I don't know. But like, so what do you call that?
I think for me, at least, that all falls under the XR. I mean, you're sort of looking at, I think it's really not an on and off. It's a continuum, right? In terms of like how much digital information is being layered over the real world and what is the relationship between the physical world and the digital world. So, and that can go from like, I put on a headset, I'm sitting on my couch with a headset on and like all of my visual input is in the headset, and I'm represented digitally, and I'm pushing buttons and shooting aliens or whatever I'm doing, and I'm physically in a space. You can have light augmented. I think that really old stuff. I mean, Vegas has done a lot of this. There's been a lot of really interesting designers working in public spaces with sort of dynamic, interactive like you said, early Vegas, you walk over the koi pond, which is a digital projection, and the water moves and the fish scatter around from your, feet. So it's really just combining those spaces and thinking about ways to activate those spaces with digital information.
Yes. And I couldn't agree with you more that it falls under the umbrella of XR, but Tawny, would you call it VR? And what's VR?
I don't really, again, I think that kind of a binary conversation is a little dated. So I think it just isn't.
Agree. Yeah.
Not irrelevant. I just don't know if it's relevant.
There's no VR, there's no AR. It's just XR, people. It's just XR.
So the first question,
combination experiences are specific to a particular, it's more about what is the creative impulse behind what you're building? What is the technology you have? What is the technology you expect your customers or your audience to have? And how do you bridge that gap? I will say we've been working on a bunch of educational things, and we really like using the headset for a couple of reasons. And one of them for students, they're undistracted, and they talk about it a lot. They talk about the fact that they can be 20 minutes in one of our experiences, and it will be the only time where they have not had their phone in their hand at the same time, like texting somebody while ostensibly listening to a lecture or checking some kind of message while writing a paper. It's
like they're all doing right now, Tawny, like they're all doing right now.
Right, exactly. And it's a rare opportunity to have the only thing you do be that. Also at the moment, it's a little bit complicated. It's actually kind of hard to learn to move yourself in VR. So it creates a little bit of cognitive dissonance, and it creates a little bit of cognitive, we find a really productive cognitive tension, because you're having to pay attention to how you move. You have to what am I doing? And so it really hones your attention. And that's a really great environment. And for educational opportunities, short content, opportunities to get people to really think about something, it's great. But we really wanted to reach a wide variety of students, and we were looking at public universities with 40% of their class is first and family to college. Lots of people that are working, lots of people that are, sort of going into debt to be here. So the likelihood that they're going to have a $1,000 computer and then $500 headset and all this gear is just non-existent. So we had to pivot away from it. Because even though we felt like the experience we were delivering was really useful, we had felt it was excluding us from the audience we were really trying to reach. So we moved in other directions. And those are, that's nothing for or against VR, or it's just more just when you look at your problem, what are you trying to solve with the digital? Why are you adding the digital? What is it adding creatively? What is it adding sort of messaging wise, engagement? What are the pieces? Rather than I want to make a X,
Yeah, absolutely. And what is the problem that you're solving with technology is a key question that I'm asking the students to think about when they're approaching their strategic planning and such. So that's great. I think my challenge of trying to teach a course like this is, of course, that everyone wants a definition for everything. And to your point of yes, it's not, it is maybe outdated, but I do want the students to walk away understanding, well, when they say VR, what is that? I mean, it's a challenge, and you've got people that are in 2D flat, maybe 2D, 3D spaces, like some of these immersive platforms that don't require headset, and they're calling it a VR experience. It's I don't know, that's not really a VR experience. It's 2D on, So anyway, and it gets complicated really fast, right?
On a headset and somebody just plays a video in front of you and people call that VR.
VR, yes.
No interactivity. I think that it's more, I think when you look at the scales, right? How much of what you're looking at is physical world versus digital? So that's one component. And then what is your role in what you're watching? Are you a passive viewer and just watching it go by, or are you playing a definitive or reactive kind of role? And so I always, and I annoy various people in the industry, which is fine. But the 360 video, I don't think that's VR. Because because it's just a freaking video. I can go to Disneyland and stand in the middle of a room and have it projected all the way around,
That's most of what Disneyland is hey, look at stuff, right? It's mostly just
it's passive. So this is why it's probably not up to why I wouldn't want to define those things. Because for me, I look at, the most important scale for me is how active is the user? Like, what is the role that the person receiving that content is doing, you know?
It
So,
totally
Tawny,
reminds me. Oh, go ahead, Nathan.
oh, in the past, Tawny and I have like talked to content people about XR, and the idea that like XR is like AR, VR, MR,
Right.
is a continuation, but it's all kind of related to one idea of content that is in space and relates to you as the user. And there's some level of interactivity. There's all of these like different faders that you can push up and down.
Right.
When we start to ask questions about like, so, and like often VR is kind of on one end of the most immersive, and AR or MR is some sort of blended thing on like the lighter side, most reality involved. What happens when you start like being really specific about the standard, or like what amount of screen or what amount of technology or interaction is you start to ignore like what is the purpose or the goal, and you get really hung up on the technology of it, right? And some of the coolest like immersive technologies out there are like audio that aren't related to visuals or screens or headsets at all. And so like I think you have to think broadly about content and interaction in space as like the ground that you're playing in. And then you pick the technology based on the users and the goals that you're trying to do. And then you call it whatever means something to them.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's probably the most important thing, is how are you using language that's communicating with your audience? Are they seeing it as exciting? And that, to me, when I did some work with Nike, and yeah, they were very, I think they were in a space, I think they're illustrative in terms of like, they wanted this sort of really realistic interaction, and they really weren't at all prepared for the sort of technological challenges of that. And so I really pushed them to have like, what are you trying to teach? Because this was meant to go out to young students who were studying like logistics and supply chain logistics, and have like an interaction where you could learn more about supply chain logistics. And what they really wanted, of course, was like fully realistic human figures having native conversations with you. And I'm like, that is a big ass budget, and the number you've given me is nowhere near that. And it's also it's also 8 or 10 designers, and I mean, it was just a lot, and there's just no comprehension of what's required. And so I think from a brand perspective, that's some of the reasons that you see, so at least from and again, Nathan's much more expert on brand than I am, but the things that I see that seem to make the corporations most satisfied are space specific events, because you can control that space so much better and so much more. You can put up lights and set your things exactly right, and anytime you're trying to send something into the home, you're creating all kinds of variables. And if you just want to say, we're going to have this really great setup at, CES, or at our one of our brick and mortar locations, or at this festival, or, it becomes so much easier to make something that satisfies the fantasy of what it can do, because you can cheat all the edges.
I love that, Tawny. That has to be one of the quotes and the highlights of the interview today. And I think that the question then, since it's mic drop, since it's such a great segue into events, and we just are, heading out of this time where nobody was meeting in person. And I know that people are now eager, businesses are very eager to get back to in person. Maybe this is just a good time to chat a little bit about some of the ways that immersive is used at events. And I don't know, Nathan, if this is more your bailiwick, but thinking about maybe some cool, you mentioned CES, Tawny, and we, some of us have had the opportunity to go to some of these huge events and see some really cool shit in person. And then what about at home? And maybe chat a little bit about that now in today's world with where we're at.
I'm curious, like with like emojis, maybe if folks on the call, experienced concerts in Fortnite, concerts in TikTok, the Grammys, or the Super Bowl in 360.
Okay, I'm going to raise my hand. I'm applauding or something. I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay, awesome.
I'm doing something.
No.
Yeah, I'm
So
me.
okay.
Me. I
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Anyway, I've got some thumbs up. Okay.
We did. There's some good ones.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, the cool thing about streaming an event, and it's not necessarily super interactive, but like at the Super Bowl, you could watch in a 360 video viewer, either on your phone or in a headset, right in front of Snoop and Mary J. Blige, and right, like in the middle of the Super Bowl. That kind of connection and that kind of front row experience, I think, even though it's pretty passive and maybe you just bounce around to where you're looking, is like, one, you get to control all of those variables, and it's in relatively safe technologies. I want to learn about the esports tournament, and it gives you a perspective or a point of view that you couldn't have otherwise. You can't have 5 million people all on stage with Snoop, but through this sort of shared XR experience, like, wow. So I think like we've gotten to a lot more accessible, and like that's kind of being included in really traditional events, I think, is a sign that there's a lot more cool stuff coming there.
I love that, Nathan. That's a great example.
I also think there's some of the stuff that I really like is there's some low tech work that some labs have been doing, basically like park takeovers where you can sort of have you can have a limited number of sensors where like you're playing a game which is being projected on the side of a giant building, and you're going from, you know, the picnic table to the swings to do, you know, and to move pieces or to add pieces or to take pieces away. And they're the kind of things that are they engage people in really physical ways, and you have that sort of the digital is a component for making people come to a place and play together. And again, there's some really Rockwell Labs in New York has been doing a fair amount of that. They have sort of a long history of those kind of site specific takeovers, and there's some academic teams that have done. One of them, I cannot remember. It's in the Midwest, and my brain is just soft. But they did a giant Tetris where there was a party on top of a roof, and two people were playing Tetris against one another, but they were being projected onto two office buildings at full scale of the office building. So everybody in town was seeing these sort of Tetris games.
Oh my God. Can we do that for Oregon 22? Let's do that.
Exactly.
But, you know, amazing.
And to me, what the Tetris, where I was kind of thinking about the Tetris and about the sort of some of the big scale projections like that, is also thinking about that you're not necessarily creating one scale of digital event, right? And I think to your thing of thinking about, like, if you had somebody who was, maybe you have one fan at an event like that, who's actually like broadcasting out, and you can move from seat to seat or fan to fan. And you think about, what does that mean for the person who's central to capturing it or creating it or having a view on it? And then how is that shared? How does that echo out into different shares? So it doesn't always have to be you, to your point, Nathan, right? Like you can be watching somebody else do creative things. And then you can have those layers of who's making it in real time, and then who's watching it and who's responding to it.
You said lo-fi experience, Tawny, and thank you for validating my example. You said a lo-fi experience, and I got really excited. Tawny, Lisa, when I was at Augmented World Expo in November, there's an AR influencer house in LA called the AR House. And they bring in young creators, and they give them really great tools to work with, and do like a month of mentorship, like building and kind of hacking together. And they brought an experience that was an immersive VR experience that included smells and tastes, but it was super lo-fi, right? Like they prototyped it together. And so like you're wearing this headset and they're guiding a spoon with a image tracking target on it into your mouth, and you're tasting these foods in relationships to the colors and the sounds and the immersive experience that you're in. And that had so many people like just walking away with their minds blown because they were connecting other senses and connecting that full body experience. And like, we often think about these things as like, they got to be pixel perfect. They got to be super immersive. They got to be so flashy to like feel real. And this was like, just give them literally a little taste of something new, or, you know, a different perspective on flavor and taste. And it broke people's minds open. So I, you know, the scale is interesting, but sometimes it can be really personal too.
You said, what was that? Was it the AR House? Was that the name?
Yep.
And they're based where? Did you say, Nathan? LA?
They're in they're in the LA hills. Like their Instagram's pretty sweet.
I love that. Great. I need to check that out. That's a good tip. So maybe let's talk a little bit about, as I mentioned, I've given the students a very difficult task of trying to come up with an effective immersive plan and strategy for Oregon 22, which I don't know why I chose that. I'm just like making everyone's life hard, but let's, considering that it's been a little bit of an interesting event. That's a nice word for it. So it's challenges. But let's talk about what should the students think. Like if I were to say, all right, and it doesn't even have to deal with Oregon 22. It can be whatever, agnostic, but just thinking about the things around an effective immersive media strategy. What do you need to consider? Where's a good starting place? Like where do the students even start?
I'll see if I can go quickly, and then Tawny can give you the real good advice. The model that I'm really a fan of right now, right, is often we want to think about this huge, big, super immersive, right?
You're like Tetris on a side of a building.
Well,
that's what I want now.
Yeah, but anything that takes like 8 developers and designers to get done is probably too much. In my brain. And I think the astounding and powerful experiences typically start with one problem or one idea that you want to like investigate. In my world, I think a lot about it as like one piece of data or one sensor or one sort of interaction that can like give you more information or help you understand what's going on. And then like you use that to solve one problem or approach it in like a new way. And like a really cool example of like one sensor, one problem, one solution is the Barbara Bush Foundation does literacy work. And they have these trainings to help people learn how to read. And the one thing that they were curious about that they didn't understand was, are the people who are looking at this training material actually looking in the right places? Are they interacting with the training in a way that would help them learn the material? And so they used eye tracking sensors in the VR headset to just validate, is this person looking in the right place? And if they weren't, they did corrections to help guide them to where they needed to be. And their trainings, they're getting like people from not literate to reading really great in no time at all, because they know when somebody's attending to it or not. It didn't need to be that they were reading in a jungle on Mars or that there was like an avatar there, you know, holding their hand. It was, they got a little bit more information about what was going on. They helped the person with the context of that moment. And then they gave them the tools to move on and be powerful in the next step. So I think that like start with a really specific idea, problem, or experience, do one thing really well about it, and include your user or your include that person so that they're having a meaningful emotional experience is 1-1-1. That's my model.
Yep.
Okay. Love it, Nathan.
And I completely agree. I would say I'm also big, and I think the literacy example supports it. The objective actually is not to bring your customers into AR, it's to make them do something, or anything else, it's to make them do something different in the real world. All of your objectives are outside that experience. So where are you driving them through? So like if you said, I want people to visit, some generic festival. I want them to visit 10 of these really unique places, because they're not going to be the places. I don't need to add, like, if I'm at Comic-Con, I don't need to advertise for anybody where the Marvel character is going to be. Like, everybody's going to find that information is going to be fine, right? But like, what if there were 10 new voices in comics that were going to be scattered through the system that you really wanted somebody to find, and you wanted them to go discover these things? Like, what would you do for that? Would you want them to, so like, think about what your external result is. And I absolutely agree. Repetition, then using the same. How do you walk them through? How would you provoke that? Would you, like, in that, is it physically distributed? Do you use like a little map overlay, like almost any, like, basic AR apps? You've got access to Google Maps. It's relatively easy to bring something like that in. So if you want to pin things, and drive people to physical places, you can do that. Once you get there, what do you want them to do? You want them to take a picture? Do you want them to post? Do you want them to, so yeah, I think it's just thinking through. I think and you're absolutely right. Don't solve all the problems, solve one.
Well, and I love that. And I think that's going to be part and parcel of each team's job, is to, when they build their strategies, is figuring out what problem are they solving. And there's going to be a lot of freedom. I'm not going to be really prescriptive, sadly, for all of you students. I'm going to try to give you as much freedom as I can to be creative and kind of figure out that problem. But maybe one way to think about this, if I can, so when we think about an event, like a major sporting event, where you're going to a place like a Super Bowl or this track event or whatever, and there's two audiences, right? There's the audience of people that are there in person, and then we've got the digital audience. And so maybe just toss out some ideas, Nathan or Tawny, or both of you, on some of the problems that are inherent in that kind of a situation that immersive might start solving.
What are some problems that you could solve with immersive technology at an event?
Yeah, well, let me give, so one example that's running through my head, and maybe it would be, okay, when you think about it, it's very traditional, somewhat like the Olympics, maybe, although I know the Olympics did some really sexy things recently. But you think about a broadcast, oh, you're broadcasting all the track things, and they're going to be, that broadcast is going to be on lockdown, and they're going to be super protective of it. But it's really a passive thing, right? If you're at home watching this thing, it's going to be pretty passive. That would be one problem. Nobody wants to consume anything as a passive viewer anymore, unless you're over the age of 50. But anybody younger wants to be engaged and interactive and have some agency. So that would be an interesting problem to solve. Like, okay, how can we make this typically traditional passive broadcast something where the viewer all of a sudden has agency, right? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I kind of like, I would go a different, I think that's layering, like, television. Like, I really enjoy watching the Seahawks, and the TV is a radically better way to watch the Seahawks than any other mechanism. If you want to watch a football game, the people who are paid to present that are better at that than anybody else. And I've been to the stadium. Being at the stadium is a great experience, but it is a terrible way to watch a football game. And if you want to replicate that, you're going to replicate a terrible way to watch a football game. And so I wouldn't attack the things that people do well. Like, you already have that. Why would you say, oh yeah, we used to do, people would be like, oh, I know, we'll give everybody a camera. And you're like, yeah, instead of the people who know how to do this, we're going to give it to people who don't know how to do this. And then we're going to think that somehow magically they're going to do it much better. And you're like, no, skill and material skill is a real thing. You're not going to change that. I think about, I think about, like, what is, like, there's spontaneity and community that happens if you attend a big event, right? You discover things you didn't know you were going to discover, that you weren't looking for. I'll go back to Comic-Con because it's been closed for a couple of years now, but like the central hall where everybody is selling all their stuff. They tried to put some of that online, but the real problem is there's hundreds and hundreds of vendors, and you just kind of meander, and something catches your eye, and you're like, oh, that's really cool. And you go, and then you can kind of talk to the artist that did that, but you don't look for that because you don't know what it is that's not there. So I think that's something to think about. How do you capture spontaneous moments? How do you make discovery less organized, less purposeful, because again, I feel like if you're a fan of a particular athlete, you'll find whatever's posted online about them. This is more about what can you being in person, you can discover things, and that's much harder to do, I think, digitally. And so how do you help that?
Tawny, some of my favorite marketing engagements that use AR are a series that Squarespace did.
Okay.
And right, like Squarespace is not an AR company. It's not like a brand that it's web stores, right? It's a web platform. Right. But they worked in collaboration with musicians and creators, like FKA Twigs, and is the one that I remember most dearly. And there's a couple others, and they worked with those creators to build sort of a personal avatar and an expression of themselves as a filter that like related to original music or other content. And then I believe it was specifically highlighting a campaign where Squarespace was supporting artists and creatives of diverse perspectives. And so instead of like hitting you over the head with like, here's all this AR stuff, it was that you could go and embody this creation that FKA Twigs made and felt like was a connection of her music.
Right.
And so what Squarespace is doing is they're building connections between communities and the artists that they love. They're helping that community like experience a different perspective, embody something, explore these ideas, and are becoming this place that is a place where people sort of think, oh, like Squarespace is where I like got to connect all those interesting technology ideas.
Right.
And so like, I've got some now brand loyalty. I've got some awareness, like I'm telling you about Squarespace, right? Like, but like it wasn't a huge problem that they were trying to solve. And it was about like creating an engaging experience, connecting you with the artist and do something, right? Like AR and VR were great when there's limits to things, right? Is it safe to drive an F1 racing car if you're not trained in it? Well, no, but you could probably feel what it was like, you know? So there's like ways that you can kind of simplify it, where like a stadium engagement, I'll shush, but there's sort of a similar like stadium engagement that I think is really brilliant. Dallas Cowboys have like big LCD screens that have sensors and cameras in it, and you can pick your favorite players that you want to take a selfie with. Right. And then it knows your background. It cuts out the back, like it puts those players in a pose around you, like you're taking a picture together. And so the impossible thing here is those players make millions of dollars a minute, or they make tons of money a minute. There's no way for safety, for access, for their time that they could have a meaningful engagement with 10,000 fans. Right. But there's all of these fans who can have a no-touch, screen-enabled interaction and like take-home asset. They have this sort of AR photograph that they took with their favorite players that like checks all of these experience goals, and nobody has to touch anybody. Right. So there's all of these different like ways you can think about.
What team was that, Nathan? Did you say the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah.
And I think the athletic model, something like that, right? Like that if you're talking about a sporting event, you've got this really interesting events like that. You've got, in particular, track and field events, right? Or from my perspective, there's like a small number of like, everybody knows they are, everybody wants to have a picture with them. And there's a huge number of people who have committed, time and treasure to get here, and time, treasure, and talent to get to this place that virtually nobody really knows about. And they become, the model that the Olympics has long used, right, is that you find somebody like that nobody knows about and you turn them into somebody we're rooting for by telling us their story, by giving us the reason why. And, I think there's all kinds of opportunities for that kind of gem discovery in a shared digital environment. What is the, what are the Easter eggs you're sharing in your environment? Like if I'm watching something remotely, what are the temptations that are off the side of the path? Where are you putting those temptations, and what are they? And to your point, exactly, Nathan, like if you think about, again, thinking about, depending on who your user is, they, yeah, even just a video clip that you discover, even just a traditional video clip, but that you've discovered in a way that's an unexpected way, is a way to get the technology demand down much lower. You have to be, and again, this comes back to who are you communicating with? Are you communicating with people in the town where they need to be in a specific place, and when they get to a specific place, they can capture sort of the Pokemon, I guess Pokemon also makes me think, also steal everything that, don't worry about, like, oh, my idea is kind of like Pokemon. You like, that's great. Like, what we know about Pokemon is it works. And people know what it means. So when they see something like it, they've got a better idea of what they're supposed to do. And that's a handy, it can be complicated to teach people to do things they're not used to doing. And so taking whatever shortcuts you can to let that happen is also really useful.
Tawny, you're confounding. You both are confounding me because you're taking me away from. But this is so good. This is exactly why I wanted you to both be here. But what you just said reminded me of an experience from New York City that an agency built, and I don't think anyone's really experienced it. It was really on the down low. But what they did is they found, like varying. It was really fascinating, kind of crime, sort of like crime noir stories that happened in varying places in the city, and then you would have to go to that place and you'd have your phone or your iPad or whatever, and then there'd be the AR version of what happened, right? So like, oh, this woman in 1929 killed her husband right here. And then there was like this gruesome, and it was like sort of this dark thing. It was really kind of sexy and fun. But like that kind of, it's stories that I hadn't really heard of, but I'm in the city where they happened. And now all of a sudden there's this really cool AR way for me to see it. And it was like a little scout map. It was all within walking distance, and it was like a little walk, something like that. Is that kind of in the genre of what you're talking about, where we add some cool storytelling, and then that's engaging? So basically people that are coming to Eugene for this thing, that could be some fun little Easter eggs to put for them here, potentially to help build more of an emotional hook with.
Well, and if you think about that, and again, you go back to thinking about what is the physical activity you want them to undertake, right? Like if you have people and you want to draw people to subsidiary venues, or you want to draw people into the downtown, or you want to draw people, you want to draw people in other directions. What do you want the crowd flow to look like? And so that's a space where you could sort of say, okay, let's look at this space. We probably have a lot of historical information, like where's the backlog of lines? Where is the backlog of, and what's a really in moment time to do something different with that? Thinking about old days at the Timbers games, there's a entrance that's right by one of the Max stops. And even, I can't even imagine with the posts, even pre-real security, it was just massively backed up. And if you walked, around the stadium, there were like 6 other entrances, almost none of which had a line. But for a lot of
Lemmings,
people, still very often, or didn't know a thing like that, they don't have
just stand there. Yeah,
you just stand there. And again, you'd be like, yeah, maybe I could walk all around the stadium. Maybe there's another entrance, but I don't know if there is. And so something like this, like what are just the ways you sort of distribute people, and encourage people to engage in different places, or attend events they might not have attended, go watch the, junior shot putter, whatever the, like what are the ways you sort of say, oh, we're going to draw people over to a place so they'll notice something is happening. And maybe my outcome is I actually want them to go to this event. So that means I want them to be there sort of at a particular time. I want to have something that will provoke them to be there, where I feel like I can capture their attention once they're there.
Yeah, I love that. And I have one other quick question, and then we'll deviate from my selfish talk about trying to develop a strategy. But so in that very specific example, Tawny, where you have, you have a very specific problem that you outlaid that you want to get solved, which makes total sense. Like all the people are lined up. How do you communicate? So then we have the issue of how do we communicate that to the masses? Like how do we how let's say we've got a strategy, we know, we've got the thing, we've got the activation. How in the hell do we get people to know about it, and how do we promote it?
That's Nathan.
Nathan, how do we promote it?
This is the hardest part.
Right? It's not build it, they will come.
Oh my gosh. Oh wow. If I were able to actually tell you all of the stories. So often all of the thought and the heart and the energy and the planning goes into what's the really cool thing we're going to make. And how do we get it to people? How do we get them to be interested in it? How do we get them to download an app so that they can do a thing? Is the hardest part ever. And you really have to get into the experience on it. So like, for an example, there is, there's a couple different brands of wine that have AR apps that you can download. And then when you scan the wine bottle, you see a video played on that wine bottle and it tells you a story. That app is like 170 megabytes. And if you don't already have that app when you walk into the grocery store, there is no way, I've tested it, that you're going to be able to download that app in the grocery store while you're shopping. You could do all the
nobody wants to download an app anyway.
And who wants to be like walking around looking at a video in the middle of the cereal aisle? Like there's some considerations that you really got to put together in terms of that packaging. But if you're giving somebody a reason to engage, if you're giving them some new information or new perspective, you might be able to, and you're doing it on devices that are accessible to many people, your chances are a lot higher. Lisa, you've been talking about like strategies, events, like activations. And I do want to call out, very similar to like directing people around, some of the most powerful experiences I've seen are about placemaking, understanding a space, understanding a history, revealing layers that may not be known to everyone. There was a student project in Stanford that I had the ability to kind of advise on, and I was so just blown away by it. There were some very notable assaults on the campus in one area of the school. And the university, as part of like trying to resolve that story, turned it into a garden and told the person who had been harmed that they could share some of their words in this space and that it would be a place for reflection. But the university didn't fulfill their promise. And they didn't say yes to any of the suggestions that the victim had put forward. And so students made some plaques with the words of the victim and put them anchored to the space and made an AR experience that you could go and hear from the person who had been harmed, hear their story, hear their words, hear their experience, and understand its relationship to that space. And by sharing the story, by engaging with this person, by helping to tell their story, by giving context to this place and using it to call BS on the administration, they rallied a community of students. They had hundreds of people come and experience this thing and think about the situation, personalize it, understand it. And they made a difference. They like impacted change within the university. They got national press, they got all of this. But the thing that they did was they gave a victim a voice and they contextualized the story in a way that was undeniable. And they said, you're not going to do it. Well, we can. And like that kind of placemaking, that kind of like telling a story in a new way, revealing something that was hidden is super powerful. And I think this kind of where some of your brain was going. So like it's a very like in that case, there was a lot of things to be very careful about, but there's many magical or joyful or historical. There's many ways that you could activate a space, tell a story, add on layers that could be really engaging and could be a learning, right? Like the goal could just be to learn or to be connected or build community.
Yeah, I love that example, Nathan. Thank you for sharing that. And it's almost like a revolutionary kind of, we've got this, it's the new medium, and there's a little bit of a democratization with it, right? We don't have to have an actual plaque on your stupid garden. We've got this, our own technology now that we own and we can bring to the table. And that's so exciting. And it's a great segue to, I know, a topic that's, I think, important to both of you, which is diversity within technology and just diversity and inclusion. So maybe just chat a little bit about your thoughts on that, and is there a problem to solve? What's the current situation, and what's going on to try and help bring more voices to the table, to have more activations, to help increasing access to these technologies?
I'll volunteer that there is most definitely a problem. This is still a very gamer culture dominated sort of a lot of the worst characteristics of that are still really present in this space. And it is non-trivial. It is not to say they're not voices and they're not spaces, but that there's still a lot of that bullshit. I think one of the real challenges is that it is super complicated to actually be a new creator in this space. It is hard to do. So we've had, my studio, we bring in some interns under different circumstances, and we had an intern for the last 6 or 8 weeks who's came in with some programming knowledge, but hadn't worked in Unity, and has really just struggled to do the most basic AR things, and not, it's like my mantra. I feel like I have a giant, my giant posters in the workspace are like, "You're not the dumb one." Like, it's not you, it's like, but they're just really, they break really easily. They're complicated to get work. The systems that are designed to build them are not designed for a wide variety of types of brain and thinking. And so it is hard. I think it's important, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Just because I like conflict and it's fun to argue with Tawny.
Yeah, I like it.
There are some ways, Lisa, that I would say new technologies, new modes of communication, sort of new generations of thinking about things kind of gives folks who are not traditionally advantaged an opportunity. There's a creator named Leighton McDonald who I had a chance to meet at AWE. He's a SnapLens creator. He's an NFT artist. And one of the things that he did, like one of the projects that Snap sort of supported and featured him in doing, was he said, people who look like me, he's like, I'm a Black kid who grew up in New York. People who look like me don't usually get to go to museums. So I made a museum with Black artists. We minted NFTs so that they could be engaged in they could be in the process and have value from being shared. And then he built an AR museum where you could anchor his museum and move about and view these Black artists' NFTs within a Black-made space. And this not only gave Leighton the ability to raise up the voices of people in his community and sort of share his perspective, right? Like he's, by attaching it to blockchain and some of this other stuff, like there's the possibility that there could be like long going value, revenue, potentially like other opportunities for people. And this is something that he created because he saw a gap in his experience in this space and was like, well, I'm going to go make it. Right. And so that, right. Like what Tawny said about like, when there's a problem, like, don't look at what's doing well, like look where there's gaps. There aren't people like me in this space. So I'm going to do it. Right. And it's really important, right, that like white bald dudes that look like me aren't making, experiences that tell your story.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like I can't tell Allison's story. I don't know what Kevin's like that's important to Kevin. And like that in itself is like kind of a call to action, right? Like don't let some old dude who looks like me tell your story. Like find a tool that you feel comfortable in, that you can start to express yourself in, that you can sort of attach some meaning to, and start to use it to tell your story, because it'll probably hit way harder than anything people who don't know that perspective are going to be able to do.
Oh, I love that, Nathan.
It's rare that I also love arguing with Nathan, but I think structurally that's completely on board, right? Like there are many fewer barriers. If you have something that you created, there are interesting ways to distribute it. Where I was more focused and where I've been focused right now, because I've been really looking at trying to at the educational side of it, the learning curve is just very steep, and it's very hard to motivate people along it, because it's like, oh, weird, stupid technical thing, weird, stupid technical thing, weird, stupid technical thing. And it's hard to get a simple thing built, because I think once people build a simple thing, then they're like, oh crap, I bet I could do something really interesting. It's like there's a lot of progress there. What I'm trying to figure out, and a thing that I've been sort of really focused on, is like getting those first steps, right? Getting people to realize they can solve the problems, getting them to realize they can get to that. The distribution piece, I agree. A lot of the structures have not been built yet. There's no studio system of this, so which also means there's nobody that there's no gatekeeper that you have to get permission from to go to distribute it. It's just that the making it is, we still have very complicated tools for making it. I sort of think about Bobby Rodriguez in the Super 8. Like there's a lot of narratives in filmmakers who now are no longer young, but at some point were young, that they picked up their Super 8 cameras at home, like the video cameras that their parents had been shooting like family vacations with, and started to make art. But that was much further along the technical. That was a consumer grade piece of equipment that was designed for consumers to be able to use. So they were able to make, much more readily, I think, or with it was much easier to jump the hoop to start to make.
That's why one of my big, like, what's it take to do something successful, or like, how do you start? For me is like, find partners, right? Like, because it's hard to do it all by yourself, right? Like there's beauty in simplicity, because then you limit the number of technical things you got to get over. But then, right, like building partnerships, building sort of consortiums, finding people who can help deliver little bits and pieces, building that community and sort of lifting each other up together, I think is also super key to getting that diversity question addressed more thoroughly and trying to reduce some of those barriers. It's kind of interesting. I would say at AWE, it was notable that the technologies, the platforms, the people who are making tools were really starting to listen to creators. And they're really starting to like I want my tools to be ubiquitous. I want people to pick this up and think it's the best ever. So I need to get people making in it. And that to me was a really good sign, right? Like when you have creatives at the table saying, this is what we need to be able to do something well. I think that backlog of hard to get started will start to fade away soon.
And I will say, I mean, very much in the way that WordPress made, websites easy to create. I mean, I do think that there are platforms that are up and coming that are making it easier and easier. I mean, we were in a few immersive platforms just this week, like LearnBright is one that, it's super easy. You push a button and the room is templated and you can bring in. So there are tools out there where you can dip your toe in. You don't have to be necessarily a coder or a programmer or even a 3D content developer to start playing around with this stuff. And then if you get a taste for it, to Tawny's point, and you like it, you can start increasing your knowledge level. I will just say that, so if anybody has, experienced, I think many of you have, Snapchat lenses, their studio, right? The Snapchat studio, if maybe some of you have even dabbled in creating your own lens. It's really not that difficult. And it's a great place to start. It's something that you are familiar with and you can get in and be creative with. And Danny, who teaches in the Oregon Reality Lab, is going to be doing a Snapchat AR lens workshop coming up here at our Experiences Day. So you all have a chance to do that. And I think my main thing that I want to fight against is anyone having the idea that it's too hard for them to do. I'm here to tell you, it's not. I don't know, maybe. So don't, if that's the only thing stopping you from being drawn to this, try to think about approaching it from less of that kind of a belief and more I think, I would like to believe that everyone has the capability of getting involved to whatever level they want to. And that maybe didn't come out right, but you know what I'm trying to say. Let's open up to questions. Hey, it's 3:03. Can you guys stay for just another 5 minutes so we can get some questions from students? I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know everyone's super busy. Let's take a few questions quickly from students. I know you guys are sick of hearing all of my questions. So Justin, you're always so quick with the questions. I love that. What do you got for us?
So since this is broadcast to Twitch, I've actually seen that the XR space has been evolving on that platform. I wanted to know what's your perspective? Some of my content creators I watch on Twitch use the VR space for content. They do e-dates, but literal VR e-dates for contestants to win money. Do you guys feel as though using VR for personal meetups or hangouts is a beneficial aspect? And how do you continue using that as a public space to hang out? I guess is my question.
Nathan, do you want to try to answer that one? Thanks, Justin.
Thank you. That's a great one. I'm really excited about XR spaces for people to come together. Honestly, my children over the last 2 years, I have 2 middle schoolers, they've done most of their interacting with peers in Roblox and in Minecraft, right? I watch the Roblox awards with them bouncing around. And we are including web VR as a core experience in the AWE night event that I'm hosting. Right? If we're going to be talking about trends in XR, I want people to have accessible ways to start to get into it. And starting with web VR and some of those social spaces, I think is a great place for people to get comfortable. And Lisa's got some friends with amazing stories about the power of social VR spaces. So I'm really bullish on it. I think it's where some of the most interesting value has come from, honestly.
Thanks, Nathan.
The trouble is that any community space still needs to be moderated. You can't just throw a space out there and expect it to be safe. And I think that's a place where people forget, similar to marketing.
Yeah, my concern with a lot of them, they're you were playing inside somebody else's corporate profit margin. That's actually my concern with Snap as well. You are just making money for them. And again, it's not that that's a bad, but you can go do interesting things in that. And when you don't have access to other things, but to me, it's so downstream. And the power structure of the people who built that is unchanged. And so I would really hesitate to say, oh, go be a Snapchat creator, because you're so far downstream. And they're selling a narrative that like you can be successful, but it's kind of like, to me, it's like I mean, and I'm deeply cynical about a lot of systems. It's sort of like, I think like if people in crypto, you need to pay attention to the fact that 80% of all the resources are owned by 6% of the people. And that means something. And there's a reason, if you're not one of those 6%, you have to be thinking about what your role is in that. So I think being cautious in corporate spaces and keeping in mind that you are the product in a corporate space and you're generating product for those corporations. And again, sometimes if those are the tools, but just don't be naive when you're playing in those spaces.
Yes, consciously, exactly, Tawny. I couldn't agree with you more. You and I are so on the same page there. And so I think there's a whole media literacy component that kind of needs to go into understanding the power structure there. And yes, I'll just say yes. Hannah, you've got a question.
Yeah, and I'm going to try and compound it into a question that makes some sense. But you mentioned also, like, one of the things that we've all been going through for the past couple of years, obviously, has been COVID and quarantine, and there was a major leap and jump into doing things virtually to keep people as interactive as possible. And I was curious about how far the technology has come with the sudden need for it in the last few years versus where it was sort of before that, and what do you think the future of it will be now, considering the kind of the times you live in? And excuse my cat, she will never leave me alone for anything.
The furry friends are the best part of any Zoom meeting, so I have no qualms there. So I sell AR like tools for work, right? Stream is a business tool that enterprise companies use to do like business. And I can tell you the number of competitors that are keyworded into the industry reports have tripled in the last 2 years. Almost every service provider wants to make a tool that looks like Stream so that they have their own version. And I think you will see in a number of spaces, right? Like the number of virtual shopping malls, the number, to Tawny's point, all of the corporate like spaces that are popping up, all of the companies who are trademarking their virtual selves in addition to their real selves, I think really points that there's a growing awareness and adoption. But where it comes to like everything's going to be in XR and VR, like in my world, like companies are just beginning to be interested. And so like I can spend all day in this, but like people are like just starting to like poke open. And I think there's like, anyway, I'm starting to rabbit hole, so I'm going to pause.
Thanks,
my
Nathan.
Explanation on a lot of it. I think that what's interesting, I think we have the opportunity to get to a more mature place thinking about when do we want to be virtual and when do we want to be in person, right? And so like in corporate settings, thinking about like if we're just going to have a half an hour team meeting, we probably, where everybody just kind of updates what they're working on. We don't need to drive into, there's no real reason for us to sit together for that. But if we want to sit and shoot the shit and drink a beer and really sort of talk to each other for 4 or 5 hours, we probably would rather do that in person. That's actually, and so creating these layers where, we're not imagining some sort of weird sort of Zuckerberg fantasy of everybody pays him for every moment of every day so they can live on his virtual real estate. But instead say we get to separate, right? We get to say, all right, I'm going to do this remotely because the thing I need to get out of it is here, or whether that's safer or environmentally less impactful or just more convenient or allows you to do different things. But we're not on a trajectory. I think we're all more mature about the fact that we're not on a trajectory where we think it would be neat if we never saw humans again. It's like, no, we've actually all kind of figured out that's bad. We would like to see them. So it's just, I think it's that selectivity. And I think so it's finding spaces where it goes back to this thing I think Nathan and I both started with, like, what's the problem, right? Like, what are the problem you're trying to solve? And I'm more excited about the corporate space as well, thinking about, and I live in sort of the edge of rural Oregon. And I do think a lot about like how do you create opportunities for people who don't want to go live in Portland? How do you create real creative, interesting opportunities for people who maybe want to live other places and distribute their talent and their resources into other, be able to make choices, be able to make layered choices, and not like, well, if I want a really interesting job, I have to live here. So, I think there's a lot of practical applications that I'm excited about.
I love it. I think we need to wrap up. So I want to thank both Tawny and Nathan so much for taking the time to share their expertise with everyone. Just big round of applause for Nathan and Tawny. And it was just so awesome to be able to catch up with both of you. And Nathan, I will look forward to seeing you at AWE night coming up here this month. So I'll be joining Nathan for a live event, AWE night I think it's the 27th of April. So you guys can tune in and watch me and Nathan then. And Tawny, it was so great catching up with you. You're just so brilliant. And you got me thinking about the Oregon 22 strategy, and there's a lot to think about there. And I feel like I probably bit off a lot, but your insight is super helpful. So I just want to thank you for that. And I will, hopefully have you both in again. And I will hopefully be teaching this next year. So good news, I only teach this once a year. So I'll only be coming around once a year. But thanks again, both of you. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. So if the students, if you could stay on, I'm going to let Nathan and Tawny drop, and then I'm going to go ahead and stop streaming.
So Lisa, let me know if there's any